Welcome to Learning Unlocked. I am your host, Brit Bingold. As an instructional specialist in Gilbert, Arizona, I am a total nerd when it comes to classroom strategies and educational pedagogy. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. Today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Before we get going on the interview today, I just wanted to do a quick reminder that if you have time to rate us and write us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would appreciate it. The more reviews and ratings we get, the more educators will see our podcast. So if you like what you're hearing and you think others would too, please head over and provide us a review. Thanks. Hey key holders, welcome to episode 20 of Learning Unlocked. Today, my guest, Bobson Wong, and I are discussing the Math Teacher's Toolbox, which he co-authored with Larisa Bukalov. This resource truly expanded my knowledge of math strategies, but it also made me reflect on my own experiences as a math student. And I have serious math anxiety, and I think this book made me kind of wish that my past math teachers had discovered and used the strategies mentioned in this resource book to transform the way they taught math, because I think it would have transformed the way I feel about math now. I think any math teacher that picks this book up will be energized about teaching math to today's students. I hope you enjoy my interview with Bobson. We went a little bit longer than the hour, but that's just because I honestly was so enjoying my conversation that I forgot to keep track of time. And I just think the way he feels about his high school students just reminds me of how I felt about my high school students. And it was just so great to have a conversation with him. So please enjoy the interview. Hi, Bobson. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, I'm getting excited for the holiday season and just trying to stay warm, even though I live in Arizona and it's only 62 degrees out. I'm freezing. But I know you live in New York City, so it must be much colder there. I don't know what it is there, but
Yes, it's kind of well, today was kind of rainy, and it was to be honest, I actually didn't go outside today.
but it was rainy, so I'm sure it was
It
cold.
was rainy, so it was colder than yesterday. Yes, but we have a winter storm coming up soon.
Yeah, you're supposed to get snow soon, you said.
Yes. So,
Yeah, I don't see snow where I live. I live in Gilbert, it doesn't see snow, but up in Flagstaff, they get snow. So I can get snow if I want it. I just have to drive up a little bit. But so I know you live in New York City, and you said that the school you've been teaching at has been really teaching remotely this entire school year so far. I mean, since March. How has that been going?
well, it's been really tough. It's been difficult for me. It's been difficult for the students. I mean, in the spring, it was abrupt, obviously.
Right.
And so, but one thing I realized when we went remote was that because I had been with my students for several months already, I kind of knew who would do what, and I generally I had already established a relationship with most of them already, so it was easier for me to work with them remotely and to reach out to them. But this fall has been tough because I have students that I haven't seen before, that I've never met before, and students that I literally have never even seen before. I mean, I have students
Crazy.
who are freshmen, and so they're new to the high school. We don't even have their photo IDs in the system yet, so I literally don't
Oh,
know what they look like. And it's been tough. It's
wow.
been tough to establish relationships with students that that I don't see on a regular basis.
I bet. Yeah. And when you do you guys use Zoom as your platform?
Um, Teachers in our school use Zoom or Google Meet. I personally prefer Zoom because I find that it has better control over the environment, and it
Yeah.
allows for better collaboration among students, which I think is
Right, with
really
their
important.
breakout rooms and
Right.
things like that.
Yes.
So do you teach to just like a bunch of black screens, or do some of your students come on, or do they just keep their cameras off?
Well, most of my students actually keep their cameras off and they keep their microphones off. And at first, that was really disconcerting. And because I really did feel like I was just talking into a void to a bunch of black screens. But
Yeah.
I've come to realize over the last couple of months that that it's really important for a lot of my students to have their cameras off,
Right.
and so I've kind of gotten used to that, and I've learned to get around that by figuring out other ways to engage with them without having to look at them all the time. And I've also realized that a lot of kids are sensitive to the idea of being potentially being stared at for 45 minutes. It's not something that would happen in an in-person environment.
So true. We're used to being stared at. The kids
Right, right.
aren't. Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's get into that a little bit later for
Sure,
sure in the podcast. But if you could just give our listeners a short bio of yourself so they can kind of know who you are, how long you've been teaching, what you teach, and all those types of things.
sure. Well, I've been teaching math, high school math in New York City for the last 15 years. Um, I teach in a public high school, in a large public high school with over 3,000 students in the building, about 3,000 students in the building.
That's big.
I'm a three-time recipient of the Math for America Master Teacher Fellowship in New York
Oh,
City. Um,
awesome.
I am the author of the Math Teacher's Toolbox, which is the reason why we're having this podcast.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm also writing another book on. It's an algebra review book, which will be coming out by published by Wiley sometime in the pro- probably in the next 2 years or so. Um, and I love to write about math. I love to think about math, um, and I love to share my ideas about what I've learned and what I've struggled with in teaching
Hmm.
math.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love that you're having a new book out even for algebra. You said you are trying to incorporate some strategies into that algebra book, right? A review
Yes,
book for algebra
yes,
from the Math Teacher's Toolbox
yes,
too. So that's perfect.
yes,
Okay, well, talk to me more about. Okay, so yes, we are here to talk about the Math Teacher's Toolbox. It's kind of piggybacking your episode off of a episode we did talking about the Science Teacher's Toolbox with
yes.
Tara Dale.
Hmm.
And it's just her resource is so awesome, and your resource is awesome as well because it's really usable strategies. It's so great because it's like any math teacher can pick it up and get some strategies from them. So just talk to me about this book and why do you think it's great for math teachers and how you really do feel it impacts student learning in a meaningful way for math teachers.
Well, the Math Teacher's Toolbox is a book that was written by me and another veteran teacher, Larisa Bukalov. She and I teach at the same school, and we've been teaching together for about 14 years. And so
Wow, that's awesome.
this book represents uh, our experiences, our struggles, and our triumphs over the last 14 years of teaching together. We wrote this book as a compilation of strategies that we've used in our classrooms to make them more engaging. And so we designed this as a resource for all teachers, not just for new teachers, but also for veteran teachers, because we feel very strongly that no matter how long you've been teaching, you can always learn something more. And we've been learning something new every year we've been teaching, especially
Oh,
now with
absolutely. I learn something new all the time.
yes,
Yeah.
especially now with remote learning when
Yeah.
we a lot of us, myself included, feel like a brand new teacher. Um, in this book we had four central beliefs about math that we worked out throughout the book. We believe very strongly that students should feel safe before they can learn. We believe that math should make sense to students. We believe that all students need access to rigorous mathematics, and we feel that teachers don't have to do everything to succeed, because we feel very strongly that teachers get overwhelmed with all kinds of ideas and information about how to improve their classes. But we also feel that teachers can't do everything. I mean, we there are physical limitations to what we can do. And
Hmm.
so we try to focus on the most important things, which we feel are building relationships with students, making sure that the content that we teach makes sense to them, and but making sure at the same time that the content is also uh, rigorous, so that so that they come out of it with a deeper understanding of the mathematics.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that the first one you said was that they should feel safe before they can learn. I mean, they really should. If they don't feel safe, if they don't feel like they can trust you, if they don't feel like you're actually a credible person, not just even a teacher, but a credible person, they just shut off, they shut down. And I really do like that you said you guys have that kind of as your first belief is if you want them to learn, they've got to feel safe with you. And then I love that it should make sense. I mean, we know good teachers clarify how students can improve and how students should, can learn and that they shouldn't say like, oh, I'm bad at this or, oh, I can't do this, that they really, it should make sense to them. It should be clear. So I loved all those beliefs that you guys kind of stemmed from. I thought those were really great.
Thank you. It's we really wanted to emphasize not just the importance of content, but also the importance of building relationships. And we found that so many math teachers emphasize the content. They emphasize that math should make sense, and so they try to make all these connections. But we found that without building those relationships with students first, or simultaneously with that, um, none of it matters, because they won't care about the connections. They won't care about the the content. They won't care about how neat it is, because they just won't care about what we're talking about.
Hmm. Yep, you got to build the relationships first for sure. So it's so important, and that's why I'm sure this year has just been so difficult because you're used to building those relationships and having those relationships so you can dig deep into all of this and it's probably very difficult remotely. So talk about how the book is divided. So I know you guys have divided it up into four parts.
Yes. So there are four basic there are four parts to the book. The first part talks about basic strategies. So these we feel are our central beliefs kind of expanded in more detail. So we have chapters on motivation. That's actually the first chapter in the book. We have a chapter on culturally responsive teaching, and we have
Love that.
chapters on mathematical communication. And in all of these chapters, we don't just talk about the theory. We don't just talk about uh, the general ideas, but we also talk
Hmm. The
about
pedagogy behind it. Uh-huh.
specific ways that these strategies can actually be done on a day-to-day basis. And we feel that that's very important for us, because we've had people tell us over the years of, oh, you need to do that, and oh, you need to do this. And our question has always been, well, how does that work? What does culturally
Yeah.
responsive teaching look like in a
Look like.
math classroom when I have to teach the rules
Hmm.
of exponents? The second part is about planning. So we have chapters on planning units, lessons, homework, assessments, and grading. The third
Okay.
part is on building relationships with students, with other teachers, and with parents. And the fourth part consists of a variety of other strategies for enhancing lessons, such as differentiation, cooperative learning, formative assessment, project-based learning, and technology, and ending the school year.
That's
So we
awesome.
try to
It
cover
really is a
everything.
great resource. I mean, you really did cover. I don't even know what else I could put in there. You guys covered so much, and you're right. It's when we teach PD classes, we always try to give the teachers, here's what you can do tomorrow. With this strategy, it's great to learn the research and the pedagogy and everything that goes behind it. But that's kind of my job is to just figure all that stuff out. And create it into a useful tool for that teacher to take and use, and so that's what I love about your guys' book, is that it's here, it is, this is how you can do this in real life, like real world teaching. And you said that this is also still relevant during the pandemic, like we can still do this online because you've been doing it since March.
Exactly, and something that we feel very strongly about is that in order to make remote learning or hybrid learning or any kind of learning happen during the pandemic, it's important to think about the basic assumptions and the basic strategies of teaching. It's not about the nuts and bolts of how do you do that in Zoom, or how do you do that in Google Meet, or what buttons do you click, or what app should I use. It's more about what are the basic principles. And
Mm-hmm.
so we feel very strongly that the you, going back to the basic ideas of building relationships with students and making content relevant, and making content rigorous, is something that should be done even in remote learning, and can be done with remote learning. But it's something that you would be doing even if you were in person.
Right, exactly. You just have to figure out a different, it's just different, right? Like you said, everyone feels a little bit first year teacher, like Bambi kind of, well, just starting to learn how to walk again almost. But if we go back to some of those basic principles of effective in-person learning and teaching, they can transfer over. We just have to kind of think a little bit outside the box for sure. In the book, you discuss, I mean, hundreds, and I'm not even joking, it's hundreds of practical ideas to support students. But one idea you address specifically is homework. And this is something that is a passion of mine, I think, as a parent and as a teacher. But I have seen homework become, where it's just crying at the dinner table. I can't get through this. I don't understand it. I'm stupid. I'm bad at math, or I'm bad at English, or I'm bad at science. And it's been hard as a parent to see that, but it's also been hard as a researcher to know that in the elementary grades, especially where my kids are at, homework really isn't super effective. It doesn't hurt them, but it's not a huge impact. Now, at the high school level where you're at, obviously it's a higher impact for homework. But what math strategies do you guys use for homework? Because we want it to obviously enrich the student's experience and have things stick more. But I've just seen, like, there's just such a range for people, and people are very passionate one way or the other about this topic. So I just wanted you to kind of talk about how you guys view it in the book.
So we feel that homework is important for a math class because it allows students to get practice. It allows students to um, reflect on and assess their own work, but in a way that is not summative. It's not. I mean, we do grade it, but it doesn't affect the grade in a significant way. It's not like a test. It's not public in the sense that it's not as if students have to go up in front of the class and explain something.
Okay.
But it's a way for students to reflect. What we like about homework the most is that it's a way for students to reflect privately on the content and just see what they know and what they don't know. So we find that when it's done right, it can reinforce student understanding. Um, but in order to do that, we have a couple of ground rules. So we try to keep homework short, try to keep it between 15 to 20 minutes for each class, because in high school especially, students have, well, at any level, but particularly in high
Yeah.
school, they have other subjects that often have a lot of work. And so we find that even limiting homework to between 4 to 8 problems a night can be enough. Now, these 4 to 8 problems um, should not be the same type of problem done 8 times. It can cover a variety of topics. For example, in a 6 question homework, I might have maybe 2 or 3 questions that deal with the most recent lesson. Maybe
Hmm.
two questions on today's lesson, one question on yesterday's lesson, and then a few questions from previous lessons, so that students can see connections from previous topics, they can recall previous topics, and they can also be able to answer some questions correctly if they didn't understand the most recent lessons.
Right. And I love that. I mean, that space practice we know from research is huge for their learning and growth and understanding. And I like that you talked about reflection. So, through my research on homework, because I do teach a homework course, the three types of homework that I found in research that are the most successful are retrieval based homework, reflection based homework, and play based homework. And it sounds like you guys are really hitting that retrieval based. Can you retrieve from previous lessons and obviously the lesson you just did? And then the reflection, having them reflect and assess their own work. So that's awesome. And I also love that there's no need to do 20 problems that are the same over and over. And that's kind of how math homework was for me when I was in high school. It was like, here's our lesson. And then now go do these 21 problems. And then you just kind of basically just applied the formula to the 21 problems, and that was it for the day.
Well, one thing I want to make clear is that I'm not opposed to practice. In fact, I feel very strongly that students need to practice math in order to become successful. But
Absolutely. Practice is key
right,
too.
but what I what
Hmm.
but what I think but so it's not that I don't want students to do 20 problems. It's just that I don't want them to do 20 problems on the same topic on one day. So
Okay.
I'm all in favor of having students do 20 problems of practice on one particular topic, but I think that it's more useful to spread that out over 10 days,
Several days.
rather than have them do it all in one day. Because if they do it all in one day and they get it, do you then say, okay, they got it, and then you just move on to the next day? So you give 20 questions on the next topic? So then if you keep on doing that, then they never practice what they've done in the past, and so they forget it.
They do. That's what I did. I mean, that's my math experience was I did, 20 problems every night almost. Or like odds one night, evens the
Right.
next night, odds, you know what I mean?
But and it's not even so much the number. I mean, 20 problems I think is a bit much, but it's not even so much the number of problems that's the issue. That's the issue. It is um, the number of topics covered. Because
I
after
like
about
that.
the fourth or fifth problem, the kids will either get it or they won't. And
Right.
if they get it, they'll wonder, well, why am I doing another 15? And if they don't get it, they'll wonder, well, why am I doing another 15?
Exactly. I don't want to do another 15. I'm not getting
Right.
it.
So,
Right.
so unless you're providing some kind of guidance to help them
Hmm.
get that, and there are tools out there. There's a website called Delta Math that I use a lot that allows students to practice the same topic over and over with different questions. But
Mm.
that website gives you the answers and gives you videos as to how to do the question, so that if a student doesn't get the question correct, they can student can look at the video, can look at the answer, and perhaps learn something, so that the student can do another question on that topic correct. But at least that
Right.
provides
Kind of coaches them up a little bit. Like
right,
here's where your missteps were or whatever. Yeah.
right. But simply providing students a sheet of 20 problems and say, hand it in to me tomorrow without any further guidance is not very useful.
No, and to you or the student, really, even as you trying to formatively assess them, or even I think that's where we get the tears or I don't want to do this. Is it's that homework sheet of repetitive problems,
Right.
instead of this kind of space practiced, um, you know, give students the time to absorb the information, like you said. And again, if they don't know if they know it, they know it, and if they don't, they don't, and they don't need to do. Either way, they don't need to do it that many times. So, talk to me about homework as discovery because I like that idea.
So sometimes I do homework as a way to find a pattern, or discover something that you may not have time to do in class. So,
Hmm.
I've used discovery activities online, where students are able to go online and click through something and discover a pattern. Of course, the issue with that is that not everyone has internet reliable internet access at home. Other times I've done something that's just on paper, where here are some uh, here are some numbers, here are some equations, here are some things to work with. Just do this on paper and come back, and we'll talk about it in class. So it doesn't even have to be that that students derive the entire theorem at home by themselves.
Right.
It
Yeah.
could be just as simple as do the work at home, because it's something that we've talked about before, and then in class we'll come together and we'll talk about what this means or what patterns you see, and so that it provides a break from the practice. And it also is a nice way to kind of save time in class, especially if I'm starting up a new topic. Um, and it's just a way for students to do something different on homework.
Yeah, it gives them a break from practice, like you said. And it kind of reminds me of that flipped classroom model where you're kind of like, instead of you giving them all the information, right? They're kind of doing some discovery prior to you then coming in and having a discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and then homework is transfer.
So another thing that I've done is have students respond to a prompt or some other type of question. Um, uh, and this is also good for introducing another topic. So for example, if I'm talking about symmetry, um, I mean, one way to do it is to start off the lesson by saying, "What is symmetry?" or "What do you know about symmetry?" But
Hmm.
another possibility is to have students look around at home and look and find examples of symmetry in their own home.
Oh, I love that.
So
Yeah.
it could be something outside. It could be just something on their bookshelf. It could be just a pretty plate that they have in
Okay,
their
now I'm
kitchen.
looking in my room.
And
And there's like my windows are symmetrical. Yeah,
right.
okay.
And
Right.
so and then they can come in and come in with a description, come in with a picture, come in with a drawing, just come in with something. And again, it's not 10 questions of 10 equations to solve, but it just gets them thinking about it, and it provides a little preview, and it allows students to come up with answers that they wouldn't be able to do if you asked them on the spot at the beginning of class.
Right. Yeah, and it also is relevant. They can see some relevance into, oh, symmetry. Okay. I have discovered this on my own. And now I can transfer that knowledge into my life, and now I can bring it into the classroom.
Sure.
That's awesome. Okay, so the takeaway ultimately for homework in the book, in the resource book.
Homework does not have to be a sheet of 20 repetitive problems. Homework can be shorter, um, so that each problem becomes more meaningful. It
Hmm.
doesn't even have to be practice every night. It could be discovery or transfer. Um,
Yeah,
but it's a way but homework is a way for students to reflect on their work, and recall prior knowledge, or think about something that will help them in the next lesson.
I love that. Amen. Okay. Question. My next question. Okay. So this resource is so big. It's from planning units to motivating students. You guys have differentiating instruction. But what stood out to me was how you assess student learning beyond quizzes and tests, especially I feel like in math. I think a lot of math teachers I work with, especially in secondary, I mean, not so much in the elementary, but secondary teachers I've worked with kind of get stuck in the quiz and tests and for kind of like a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. And obviously, I think I'm not saying quizzes and tests are not important because they are. You need to have some benchmarks and know where your students are. But I really liked that you had ideas for kids that are at different ability levels. And then also, like, what strategies do you guys use as formative assessments? And then how often do you use these strategies?
So, formative assessment is something that we believe is really important for teaching, and um, we found that without doing formative assessment on a regular basis, we really have no idea what students are learning. And so, how many times teachers say, well, I taught the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about it, so the kids must have gotten it. And then
Yeah, right.
we give a test, and the kids do poorly on it, and then we say, "What? But I taught it." So
Well, and the kids are so frustrated. I
right.
think that's when I get called in because parents and kids are frustrated, and the teacher's like, "But I did," and I'm like, like, do you really know what's going on? Do you have a kind of a nose for like what's actually going on in your classroom, a pulse?" And that I try to explain to them. The formative assessment is kind of having a pulse on what's going on. Yeah,
So formative assessment is something that we try to do while students are learning. So of course, there are times when we have to provide some kind of direct instruction where we tell them or we
yeah,
show them how to do something or how something works, and that's fine. Um, but we try to ask questions as we're doing this, so that students can think about what they're learning and what they're understanding. And of course, during direct instruction, most teachers ask some kind of question. But I'm not talking about the I ask a question and I call in one student, then I ask a question and I call in another student, because that only captures what one student knows at one particular time. And you may call on students maybe once or twice in a 45-minute period, which means that you don't even know what the student is thinking for the other 44 minutes, let alone what all the other students are thinking.
right.
So,
Especially the ones that didn't get called,
right.
right?
So we try to ask questions that allow all students to respond, or many students to respond simultaneously. So things like quick polls, and a lot of teachers do this. Thumbs up, thumbs down. How you understanding this? Um, some people use colored cups. Uh, Another thing that that I really love, and my co-author really loves, are whiteboards, where students can work individually or collaboratively, perhaps in pairs, on a problem or on a question, and they do their work on the whiteboard, and then I can look at their work. Students can hold up their work simultaneously so that other students can see it, and we can have a
Yeah,
conversation about that. Classroom response systems are another tool, like clickers or online polls or things like that. Think, pair, share is another strategy that I love, where students can turn to each other and have a well. First, they think about it on their own. When you ask them a question, they think about it on their own. Then you turn to a partner, talk about it, and they share out with the class. Um, Technique called "Which One Doesn't Belong" is another favorite one, which can be applied to pretty much any lesson. Um,
yeah,
you can provide four things. It could be four numbers, it could be four pictures, it could be four shapes, and you ask which one doesn't belong, or which one is different. I've actually come up with I actually heard about another way of phrasing it, and I actually like that one better. So which one is
which one
different?
is different?
Because
I
when
like
you
that.
say which one doesn't belong, it kind of implies that that's
There's a
some
wrong
that's
answer.
somehow
Something's wrong.
wrong. And when you
Yeah.
look at which one is different, I mean, you could take an example like 2, 21, 25, and 64. Which number is different from the others? And there are all kinds of possible answers that 64 and 25, they're perfect squares. 2 is prime. 21 is um, 21 is odd, but so is 25. And so there are different ways to look at this, but this strategy works best when each of the things, the numbers or the shapes or whatever, could be a possible answer. And so that strategy, I think, is particularly helpful because it allows students um, to to talk and to think and to reflect on the math, and not just to uh, answer a factual question.
And would you do any of these kind of like as a pause in your lesson? Like as you're maybe teaching something, have them stop kind of at like a chunking, like a specific spot, and then, do one of these activities like a whiteboard or a specific metacognitive question, or a quick poll, and then kind of figure out where everybody's at, and then move along? Or how would you kind of fit these formative assessments in, during a lesson?
Well, a lot of times, what I do is I present some new content, however I'm presenting it, and then I allow students time to reflect on it using one or more of these strategies.
Okay.
So it can be as simple as here's the definition, here's the theorem, here's a model example. Now why don't you try this on your whiteboards? Or it could be something like, well, here's a new concept that we're talking about. Um, what do you think symmetry means? Or what are some examples of symmetry that we've talked about before? And then, so it's not necessarily a I do and then you do. It could be reflect on this. But the advantage of something like whiteboards is that you can look at student work simultaneously, and so you can really see their thinking as it's happening. And I should also add that all of these strategies can be done online.
Right. Because you could do polling. So I'm thinking poll everywhere, but does that work for math well, or what's the online polling? Is there something specific you use?
So polling can, I mean, there are things like,
Like, I guess Zoom probably has a polling
well,
feature.
Zoom does have a polling feature. It's kind of primitive because
Okay.
currently it only has text-based questions and responses. So,
Okay.
so
No, no, no.
I use
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering what the good math one is, because the English teacher in me is like, well, I would just use.
right. But even if I'm limited only to text, I can in a Zoom poll I can ask a question like, "How much of the lesson do you understand so far?"
Hmm.
Or I even ask questions like, "How are you doing today?"
Right.
Even that just gives me a sense of the of students' mood, and that helps me adjust the lesson. But there's there's a website called oh there's it escapes me right now.
It's okay. Well, if you can think about it, it's going to come up. See, it's going to come up in your head and you're going to immediately shout it out later. If you think of it, we'll put it in the show notes. But I was just, I know a lot of math teachers are going to wonder what a good online polling would be for math. So if you don't think of it now, no big deal. I think that's a really good idea. And whiteboarding, do you have something specific? I immediately thought of Jamboard because it's free.
Right. I haven't used Jamboard very much,
Okay.
but I know that there are whiteboard apps. There's an app called whiteboard.fi. There's another website called whiteboard.chat. And I've actually been using Desmos. It's a website
Okay.
called Desmos, which allows me to create essentially whiteboards online. It's essentially a slide presentation, and I can insert all kinds of mathematical content in it. But
Oh, cool.
the advantage of all of these whiteboard apps is, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages, but the main advantage of them is that you can upload content that is immediately pushed to students so that students see it on their devices and then they respond. And as they write, you can see it, you as the teacher can see it on your screen. So what I do with these whiteboard apps is I can literally say, um, Jose, you didn't label the diagram correctly. Jack, you wrote the wrong equation. Um, Maria, let me help you because it looks like you're completely lost. And I can actually look at all the student responses at once, and I can get a sense of what they're doing, what they're not able to do, and I can help them much more immediately. And I found that students really appreciate that feedback. I've actually had students who say to me, "Can you show me all the student responses on the screen?" Because I actually share the student responses on the screen. Now I
I
can
was just gonna ask you
depend.
that. Can you share them and so they can kind of even just reflect on like, oh, that's where I messed up. You know what I mean? Or they can
Yes.
see.
Yes, and Desmos actually has the feature has the ability to anonymize student responses, so you don't feel so students don't feel like they're being called out.
Right, yeah. Hmm.
Um, but I can show student response. A lot of times what I do is I'll pose a question. Sometimes, for example, let's say it's a practice question. So I'll pose the question and I'll have students do it. And as they're doing it, I can point out corrections, and I share my screen with students so that students can see all their all the students' responses at the same time as they're writing it. And
Mm.
they like that too because they can see, oh gosh, everyone's putting arrows on their graphs. Ooh, oops, I forgot to do that. Or
Except
they'll
for me.
Right, or
Right.
they'll say, "Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Why is everyone saying 0? It's not 0, it's 5." And so they can say, "Well, I know the answer is 5. Everyone else is wrong." And then I, as a teacher, I can see that if everyone's writing 0 when it should be 5, I can say, "Okay, stop, people, because you're all thinking it's 0. It's not." So this gives me instant feedback as to what students are doing, what students are not doing, and I think it's particularly important in an online environment because there's really there are very very few ways that teachers can know what students are actually doing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's awesome because immediate feedback is what they want. They want to know how to, I really truly believe students want to know immediately how to improve, and they don't get that enough, I think, sometimes in our face-to-face classrooms, even though we try to get around to all of them. It's hard.
Right, and the advantage of whiteboards is that it also when we're focusing on the student work, we all we at the same time we're also not so worried about whether or not they have their cameras on, or whether or not they have their microphones on. So when I do the whiteboards, I don't need to see their faces.
No,
I
you
don't
know
need
they're
to
there,
have
they're
their
working, they're
microphones on
doing their thing.
because right, and because I mean if they're not writing on the whiteboards, then they're not working. Now, maybe they stepped away, maybe they're confused, maybe their internet connection is spotty, but no matter what the reason, I at least I can act on it. I can say, "Hey, do you need help?" And usually I get a response of my internet connection's spotty, or I have no idea what you just did, or I can't figure out how to click this. But at least it's something.
Yeah, and they just give that to you in the chat.
Or they speak,
Oh,
or
or they just unmic. Oh, no, they just
right.
unmute.
So they can unmic themselves. But what's important is that at least I get a response from them. And very rarely, I mean, since I've been using these tools, I very rarely get students who will not respond at all. And when I do, then I can have a conversation with them or their parents later as to what happened. And sometimes it's a technical issue, sometimes something else came up at home, but again, at least it's a conversation, and at least I have the evidence to say, "Hey, you weren't able to keep up with us today. What happened?"
Right. And then do you have office hours and things like that where they can come in at all and get help, or how does that work if they do get behind?
Um, I do have office hours of sorts. They're not official office hours, but I do give students opportunities um, to catch up on work. I mean,
Okay.
one of the things about online learning that I found is that uh, I have to be flexible with deadlines because it's just impossible to keep up with it otherwise. I mean, it's hard enough for me to grade this stuff. So if I can't grade students' work immediately after it's due, why should I demand
Do they
that they have
yeah,
to hand it in exactly at the deadline? Now, obviously, there are limitations to that. Like, I can't. It's very difficult for me to accept a flood of student work 4 weeks after the deadline because it's just very difficult for me to manage. But I found that and this is something we've talked about in the book that flexibility and building relationships is important in these situations because if students are consistently missing deadlines, um, there's something else going on, and trying to crack down is usually not going to help.
Right. Yep. There's something else going on besides the math work,
Right.
right? Another strategy you have is notice and wonder.
Yes. So notice and wonder is something where students can look at a prompt, like a picture or a word problem, and they can just ask questions about what they see and what they wonder about. So it could be a pattern, it could be a graph, it could be a picture, it could be just a sequence of numbers, and they could if you ask students just the simple open-ended question of what do you notice and what do you wonder, it allows students to um, think about the math, um, and it allows students to be a little more creative and not have to worry about, "Well, what number is he thinking of?"
Right. Being wrong.
Those
Like
kinds
it's
of
just
questions,
kind
right?
of,
Wrong. Of just like, "Oh, I noticed that they're all odd except for that one.
yeah.
So what's that about?"
Yeah.
And I mean, and the advantage of these strategies is that they can be applied to almost any lesson.
And they're great formative assessments for the teacher and for the student. I mean,
Yes.
the student, like you said, can see everybody's whiteboards or can have a discussion about which one doesn't is different or whatever, and they're kind of reflecting and they're able to kind of formatively assess themselves, and you're getting information as well as the teacher of when to kind of move on and when to hold back a little bit and do some reteach or something.
Right.
Okay, so summative assessment, what is obviously done after the learning, and you guys really have a focus on project-based learning. So could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Right. So project-based learning can be really intimidating, especially in a math class, because I think there's a lot of resistance among teachers, and I've been and I've been kind of reluctant to do a lot of project-based learning in my classes, to be honest. But I do find project-based learning to be useful, and so what's important for me is that we define project-based learning kind of broadly to be any kind of uh, s- any kind of work where students are answering open-ended questions,
Okay.
often real-world questions. So
Hmm.
when we talk about project-based learning, we often think about these massive projects where students are working on it for weeks at a time, and they hand in this massive paper, and then they do
Yeah.
this big presentation, and it's just incredibly hard to do those kinds of projects in a math class. I mean, particularly when a lot of us have end of year goals or end of year tests
Hmm.
or just things that we want to get done, and it's very hard to fit projects like that. But I don't do a lot of these massive projects because I just don't have time for it. But that doesn't mean that I don't do any kind of project-based learning. It could be as simple as an open-ended homework where students do a little bit of research. It allows assignments like these allow students to show knowledge that they wouldn't be able to show on a typical test.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like mini project-based
Right.
learnings.
I mean,
Yeah.
it could be something like, instead of practice today, we'll just do kind of a mini project of sorts where students answer some open-ended questions and they reach some kind of conclusion on their own. And it could be individualized for each group. So it doesn't have to be, again, they don't have to be guess what number I'm thinking of. Right.
Right.
It could be something like you know, uh draw start with draw a square on a coordinate plane and then do various things to it, and then what do you notice?
Okay.
Right. I mean, it could be something as simple as, I mean, it could be thought of as like an open-ended homework but done in class, so that's a little has more questions. It could be a little longer,
Right.
um and so it's I mean, you could do something like discovering pi, right? By measuring, taking various circles and um, measuring their circumferences and measuring their diameters. And what do you notice about the ratio? Oh my gosh, they seem kind of similar. Oh, that's interesting. That could be one period, that could be 15 minutes, depending on what your students are doing. Just, I think for me, project-based learning is more about getting students to answer open-ended questions in a thoughtful way.
Yeah. I like that you have that students can draw, they could speak, they could sing. It's stuff that they can do where you have
Right.
showcase talents in here. Like no, I've never been able to in any math class I have taken in my own personal life to showcase a talent I have
Hmm.
in math, like a different
Hmm.
talent that would connect to math. So even in you have geometry, create a piece of art that reflects your personality, but it includes these specific shapes. There's so many students that would be so drawn to that. I mean, well, drawn, that was a pun, but I didn't mean to do that. But they would be, they would be so like, wow, I can do this. This is my type of creativity, and this is the way my brain works a little bit more. And but they're still reinforcing those concepts that
Yes,
you
I
taught.
actually, when I taught geometry last year, I actually had students do a construction project. So what they did was they used
Yeah.
a compass and straight edge, uh, and 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 so using only a compass and straight edge, the same tools that the ancient Greeks used, create all of these shapes. Now constructions are part of high school geometry, but I asked them to create a design on a paper that reflected their personality. So I was amazed at all the different student responses that I got. I had students who were incorporating their country's flags, they were incorporating their hobbies, they were incorporating their favorite colors, and different aspects of themselves. But they were incorporating them using geometric shapes that had to be constructed using certain rules. Um, so
That's
this is
great.
something
Yeah.
that really allows students to express themselves while doing math.
Yeah, and it's non-routine. It's open-ended. I
Yes.
love that. Yeah. And then what and you said something, you did something with fractions as well.
So fractions. I mean, this is kind of a less elaborate activity, but one thing that students could do with fractions is just write a word problem about your family or about something that's important to you that uses fractions.
Well, and I know that sounds simple, but I think what it your brain immediately has, I mean, that just you critically have to think about that.
Right. So I mean, it's simple. It's simple in the sense that it is not an elaborate multi-day project.
Yeah, but it's a yeah, I don't mean simple. It just sounds simple, but it's not.
Right. I mean, right. I mean, I say that it's not simple. It's simple in the sense that it's not as intimidating for teachers as, oh my gosh, I have to give a project on fractions.
Yes, because I
And
think they get teachers I've talked to are like, I can't do project-based learning. It's too much. I can't handle it. Like
right,
they're going to be running all over the place for weeks with no direction, you know? I
right,
like that these are mini and it's like bite-sized project-based learning
right,
where the student is really in the driver's seat
right,
and you're kind of there to guide them, but you're giving them these really critical thinking tasks that incorporate the math that they're learning. I
right.
think that's really great.
Well, it only works when the students are guided. I think one of the big the big challenges with project-based learning is that it's very easy to just give students an open-ended task and say go.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's what I think. I think that's what a lot of teachers mistake project based learning for. Yeah.
Right, and usually when we give students an open-ended task without any kind of direction, they have no idea what to do, and understandably so, because it because usually that doesn't work. And so that's why I like to think of project-based learning as more like open-ended homework questions
Hmm.
that can eventually lead to larger questions. And so because students need practice with project-based learning, you can't just give them a project at the beginning of the year and say, okay, it's due in 6 weeks. Good luck, because they won't know what to do.
No, they won't.
They need practice answering an open-ended question. If it's a group project, they need practice working in groups. They need practice talking to each other. They need practice sharing documents and working with each other and meeting deadlines. And so that's why I feel that project-based learning can be very intimidating if it's not done correctly, and it leaves both the teachers and the students feeling frustrated. So I think that thinking about it as um, an open-ended homework question, and even just doing that on a regular basis and discussing it and then discussing those questions in class, so that it's not just, oh, I answered this open-ended question, I hand it in to the teacher, I get a grade back.
Right.
But getting students used to this idea of, we had an open-ended question, we come into class, we discuss it for a couple of minutes, doesn't have to be 45 minutes. It could be, okay, examples of symmetry in my home. Well, here's an example, here's an example, here's an example. Oh, 4 students had the same kind of thing, but these students did something different. Oh, that's something different. I mean, just a 5-minute conversation can get students to talk more.
Well, talk more to each other, talk more about math, and that's building relationships as well, too.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we know that it's important to hook students right away at the beginning of any lesson. Do you have like a favorite strategy from your book when it comes to getting them engaged? Well, it sounds like everything you're doing is getting them engaged. Like if I were
Right.
in your class, I would be engaged. But is there something like that you think, okay, this really is a motivator for my students? And then once you get them engaged, how do you keep them there? Because I feel like a lot of teachers I can say do really great hooks and then they lose the class maybe like 15, 20 minutes in. So you got to kind of keep them going. So is there something you can kind of pull from the book that you think, yeah, these are two really great things that all math teachers really should know and use?
So the motivational strategies that I like the best are the simplest ones, the ones that can be applied to just about any lesson. I think when we think about motivation, a lot of times we think about that real life connection. That it has to apply to their lives. I- And the reality is, for a lot of what we teach in math, there is no immediate real world connection to their lives, and
Hmm.
that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah.
Because students aren't looking for that real world connection. They want some kind of connection to something that they've learned before.
Okay.
So look. So I like to use strategies where students find a pattern, or they recognize that there's a void in their prior knowledge. Um, uh, Perhaps if they're using some kind of manipulative, if possible, just so they can uh, look at a picture, or flip some tiles,
Right. Do a
or
source
something
or
that just
something.
yeah, something that just allows them to look at it differently. Um, and so it doesn't have to be a pop culture reference. It doesn't have to be this is something that you're going to do when you grow up, because they don't know what they're going to do in and so I think, if I can make that real world connection, great.
Right.
But I think the most important strategy, I feel like the most important strategy for motivation is recognizing what doesn't work,
Hmm.
and recognizing that there are limitations um, to those amazing lessons that we have in our heads. Because if you're teaching rules of exponents, I mean, it is dry, and that's okay,
Yeah.
because in fact, some of my best lessons have been lessons where it's completely abstract. It's like algebra one, and and the kids are they're just multiplying polynomials, and it's really not a real world connection.
Right. They're not
But
like, woo, I'm going to use this tomorrow.
right, right,
Yeah,
but I feel like what students want to learn,
they do.
students that are sitting in your class want to learn, because if they didn't want to learn, they would not be sitting in your class. They would be somewhere else. They would be in the park. They would be in the mall. They would be somewhere else, but not there.
Mhm.
And so I feel that when students are sitting in my class, that at some level they want to get something. And if they can get some kind of connection, if they can learn something new, they come back for more because they like that feeling. And so
Yeah.
trying to use simple techniques of, well, you did this before and it worked, but here's another problem and it doesn't work. Well, what do you do now? And it doesn't have right. And it doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, I'm going to use this tomorrow. It's just, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a puzzle, and kids love
They
puzzles
do.
if they're presented as just something interesting to do.
I've noticed is kids love rigor. They just don't know they do.
Right,
They want to be
right,
challenged, and when they are challenged in an appropriate way where it's just out of their reach and they can get it and they know they can get it in
right,
anything, in
right,
any content area, they're going to be a little bit more motivated.
right.
I'm assuming as a math teacher, you get the why do we need to know this question a lot?
Sure. And I get it all the time, and I used to get upset when I got this question, and I realized over time that when students ask, "Why do we need to know this?" or the other question which comes up a lot is this going to be on the test?
Mm-hmm.
That's generally their way of saying, "I don't get what you're saying,"
Mm,
and so
totally.
what I
That's like
try
a
to
cry
do
for help, right?
Right, and so what I try to do now is take a step back and think about, uh, what I did in class and try to take a different approach. Maybe it's more practice, maybe it's another explanation, maybe it's a different strategy, maybe it's just a pause and say, "You know what? Let's come back to this later." Um, but I think that, when students ask, "Why do we need to know this?" They're not looking for a real world application, because most of the time there won't be one. And even if there were one, that doesn't necessarily mean it would apply to them.
Or they would get it any more or less than they did
Right,
before.
right. Because it's not as if, you're right, even if it is directly applicable to their lives, that doesn't magically make them get it. Right,
Right. And I think and so here's where I think where we're leading here, and this is my favorite part of your guys' book is that the motivation really ultimately, if we boil it down to it, is tied to that culturally responsive teaching. And it's the use of students' prior experiences to expand that learning capacity. And I think a lot of teachers miss that. I think if you miss that step in creating your classroom culture, you're you that's when you get the types of questions like, what are we doing today? Why do we need to know this? You know what I mean? This is stupid. I'm really bad at math, whatever. You get those types of responses. And those are just fear from kids. Those are, they feel threatened. They don't understand. They feel inept in some way. But if you build up that relationship, then you're not going to see that quite as much.
right. So culturally responsive teaching gets a bad rap in a lot of places, and particularly in math. I
Or
mean, there
just
are a
kind
lot of
of
people.
confused. I think people are confused on it too.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that a lot of people believe very strongly that math is somehow objective,
Yeah.
that history and social studies and English, they're more subjective because it can change depending on your opinion, but math is objective. I mean, you could look up 2 plus 2 equals 4 online, and you can see all these, you could see people writing very passionately about why math is objective. But I think that culturally responsive teaching is not so much is not about debating whether 2 plus 2 equals 4, but rather on understanding how students learn and what we as teachers can do to help them learn. So it's not making cultural references in class.
Right.
It's not wearing it's not wearing a sari or a sombrero in class. It's not making references to egg rolls
Which a
and
lot of teachers
chopsticks.
do. They think like, oh, well, I'll just change this out and we'll put in like these different types of names into the
Right,
word
right,
problems, and then I'm culturally responsive, right?
right. And it's not trying to be it's not trying to be students' best friends.
No.
It's not trying to not see their color. I mean, very uh, common response is, well, I don't see students color when I teach. I just teach the math. And the problem with that is that, as teachers, we would never say, um, "Oh, I don't think about their proficiency in English. Oh,
Mm.
I don't think about their disabilities that's on their IEP. I just teach."
Oh, see,
I mean,
yeah, I love
we
that
would never
point.
do that
Hmm.
to students. We try to differentiate as best as we can based on what we know about our students. If they have limited English proficiency, we try to work around that. If they have particular needs, we try to work around that. And so, being culturally responsive is a part of that. It's about getting to understand students' culture, their background, not just their ethnicity,
No, yeah,
um,
who they
but
are.
also their
Yeah.
who they are as individuals. It's
Hmm.
about getting to know students as individuals. I mean, that I think is a really important part of culturally responsive teaching. But in order to do that, it also involves a lot of self-reflection,
It
and I
does.
think this is
Yeah.
something that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable, because when we reflect on our not just on our students but also on ourselves, it involves thinking about what our own biases are, and we all have
Oh, totally.
biases. We all have assumptions,
Hmm.
and they're not necessarily biases are not inherently bad.
Right.
We just have to be aware of um, what our own assumptions are and think about how that affects our students and our students' understanding of us.
Oh,
I
say
mean,
it again.
we
I love that. Be aware of our own assumptions and how they affect.
be we need to be aware of our own assumptions and think about how it affects our students and their perception of us.
Yeah, and they're learning. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
So
Write that down,
you know,
people. That was a good definition of culturally responsive teaching.
right, because so much of it is, I mean, it's not about, I mean, we could think, for example, teachers have probably very strong opinions on authority. What is proper authority? How is authority treated? How do you talk to people who are authority figures? How do you not talk to people about authority figures? And how did you get those beliefs?
Yeah.
Was it from your own upbringing? Was it from something? Yeah, and then think about, well, how do students think about authority? How are they treated by authority? How might they react to authority? And so, just asking questions like that can lead to some very uh, difficult and, frankly, and painful uh, self-reflection and conversations,
Hmm.
because what I my experience with authority might be very different from my students' experiences with authority. And that's not to say that their experiences are somehow less meaningful or bad. They are what those experiences are real to. What matters is those experiences are real to them. And it's I am not in a position to say that their experiences are somehow less legitimate than mine.
Right. And I also love that you say it's also having high academic expectations for all students. I really, it gut punches me when I hear any teacher say, oh, my students can't do that, or this group of students can't do that.
Right. Or
Oh,
somehow I have to dumb it down to them so that they get it.
yes, I hate, oh, it
Because
just gut
because,
punches.
because they are, the idea is, oh, those students, they struggle a lot, so I have to simplify it for them. And that's not culturally responsive teaching either. It's not about being their best friend and understanding where they're coming from. that's such a shallow understanding of culturally responsive teaching, because that understanding where students are has to be coupled with getting them to where they need to be.
Right.
And as teachers, we often focus on where they need to be, and we like to say that we like to meet them where they are
Hmm.
and get them to where they need to be. But it's important for us to understand that students' culture, students' background, uh, can be a positive or a negative in their learning. It can help their learning, it can hinder their learning. And it's up to us to understand that and to help them achieve what they're capable of doing.
Even
And
their
this is
background
something
as
where,
a learner. I mean, they
yes,
could have been told 3 years ago by a teacher that they're a really bad writer.
right,
And they're, or that they
uh,
need, in so many words. I'm sure a teacher wouldn't be like, "You're a really bad writer," but like they've gotten the impression somewhere that they just can't write, right? Or they
right,
can't do math, or they're. So
right,
we have to also understand there's that's coming into our classroom too. And so we have to be realistic at what we're going to expect of those kids. And tell them they can reach these high expectations, but we're here. This is our job. We're here to help you get there.
right. And this is something that is applicable to everyone. I mean,
Yes.
one of the most important things about culturally responsive teaching is that the strategies that are used in culturally responsive teaching don't just help students of color, they help all students. Um, Gloria Ladson Billings, who was one of the prominent uh, authors on culturally responsive teaching, said that th- this is this is just good teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that you would want to do for all of your students. I mean, you would want to build relationships with them. You would want to get to know them better. You would want to incorporate their experiences into your teaching. You would want to have high expectations for them.
Right.
You would want to provide realistic paths for them to achieve that. I mean, all of these things is something these are things that we want to do for all of our students.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap up. This has been such a great conversation. I just keep talking to you, and then I just looked at the time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're over an hour. So wrapping up. Okay, I we have to just talk about this
Sure.
because you talk about it in the book. I think you start the book with it, we're ending the podcast with it. But how do you handle math anxiety? Because it's a real thing, and I just want to know, why was that a favorable addition to your book, and why do you think all teachers, all math teachers specifically, need to have some strategies for math anxiety in their toolbox?
So math anxiety is real. It's not some imaginary condition that's just in people's heads. It's real feelings of tension and fear. It's real tensions of it's real feelings of fear and tension when students do math. It's not just an emotional response; it's also a physiological response. So it's important because students' mindsets affect their ability to learn. If students are feeling afraid or anxious, their bodies tense up, uh, their brain shuts down into a fight or flight mode, and they just stop listening to whatever the teacher is saying or whatever they're supposed to be working on, and they just focus on their own anxiety.
Especially if
And
they
so,
see other kids moving forward with ease.
right.
Yeah.
And so, um, we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be aware of that so that students can have the tools to acknowledge it and to deal with it. So, math anxiety is not an incurable disease. This is
I
a
love that. Yeah.
condition. It's a condition that can be addressed and treated with the right approach.
Well, I think it
And
can be
so,
treated with all the strategies we've talked about today, with just
right.
giving them opportunities to. It's not all about the numbers and the equations and the problems, and it can be math can be looked at in a variety of ways, and which includes those, but in just a whole variety of different ways. And you guys give so many practical strategies for how to do that in this book.
Yes, I mean, in the end, math is a lot more than just numbers and shapes and pictures. So much of it is a feeling. I mean, and when we think about math, a lot of us don't just think about the numbers. We think about the feelings that we associate with math.
It's true. So true. Oh my gosh. So it's been so great to talk to you, Bobson. I could talk to you all day about this. And I'm an English teacher. I'm not even a math teacher, but I could talk to you all day about math. If listeners want to learn more from you, where can they find you online? So you do have your next book coming out. So we've got the Math Teacher's Toolbox, which is what we talked about today, but then you also have the algebra book coming out in a couple years.
Yes.
And then Twitter, where can they find you?
People can find me on Twitter at Bobson Wong, BOBSONWONG.
Okay.
And I'll
put that in the notes.
Yes. I also have a website, bobsonwong.com.
Oh, awesome. And what's on the website?
On the website, I have some just updates on what I'm doing, and just some occasional general thoughts on teaching math. A lot of it is links to articles that I've written about math, or
awesome. Yeah, so they can just get some ideas even if they just went to your site too as well.
Yes.
Okay, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and just talking about math and math anxiety and different strategies that teachers can use to help out their students and kind of expand math into different realms.
All right, well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about the Math Teacher's Toolbox, strategies that you can use in your classroom tomorrow to help your students. If you have listened today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting our Employee Hub page and navigating to Professional Growth and then Digital PD courses. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. For more information or resources from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. We are distributed by Libsyn to Apple and Spotify podcasts, iHeartRadio, Audible, and Amazon Music. Episodes are also available on our PGD YouTube channel under playlists. Our intro and outro music are licensed from Melody Loops. Thanks again, key holders. Keep unlocking curiosity, creativity, and innovation with your students. Just like Bobson said, sometimes it's not just about the numbers or the content, but it's about how it makes you feel and how it makes the students feel. I loved that. Stay kind and courageous, and I will see you next time.